Welcome to Headstones and Microphones Founder Stories, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation of history's most visionary founders. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these trailblazers. Now, let's meet our guest. Today, we are joined by the man who took a leap of faith into retail and built an absolute titan of the department store industry, Mr. George Draper Dayton. George, thank you so much for stepping out of history to chat with us today.
Thank you, Calvin.
It's an absolute honor to have you, George. Let's dive right into the beginning of it all. When you first conceived of your business, the world was a very different place. What was the exact moment you realized society was moving in a direction only you could see? And how did you convince the early skeptics?
You know, Calvin, it really crystallized for me when I watched the rapid expansion of the Northwest, particularly around Minneapolis. I was primarily a banker and investor in property at the time, managing the Minnesota Loan and Trust Company. I realized that as these communities grew, people wouldn't just need basic dry goods, they would need a grand, dependable center for their lives that offered quality, variety, and absolute integrity. When the original building of the Goodfellow Dry Goods Company burned down, I saw an opportunity to erect a massive new 6-story building on Nicollet Avenue. Skeptics thought moving the retail center of the city that far down Nicollet Avenue was foolish. I convinced them simply by laying down the brick and mortar, demonstrating my own absolute confidence by purchasing the business entirely and renaming it the Dayton Dry Goods Company. I showed them that the city's growth would inevitably meet us there.
That is incredible. Talk about skating to where the puck is going. But leaving behind safety to build something entirely unproven is a massive gamble. What did your life look like the day you decided to go all in, and what was the core belief that gave you the courage to take that first step?
My life was actually quite stable and comfortable, Calvin. I was well established in banking, and I had a deep commitment to my church and my family. Taking over a massive retail enterprise wasn't my original life plan, but my core belief was rooted in a profound sense of stewardship and religious conviction. I firmly believe that every individual is under obligation to do all the good he can in the world. I saw commerce not just as a way to make money, but as a vehicle to serve the public with honesty. That foundational belief, that business could be an extension of one's duty to God and community, gave me all the courage I needed to step out of the comfort of banking and buy out my partners.
That's a powerful foundation. In the absolute beginning, when you had no data, no blueprint for a massive department store of that scale, what was the one truth you held on to that everyone else around you dismissed?
The one truth was a simple, old-fashioned rule, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In the early 1900s retail world, buyer beware was still far too common. Many merchants laughed at the idea of absolute transparency, but I held on to the truth that if we treated the customer with total honesty, offered dependable goods, refused to exaggerate in our advertising, and treated our employees like family, the public would reward us with lifelong loyalty. They thought it was too idealistic for the rough-and-tumble business world, but it became our strongest pillar.
It's amazing how doing the right thing can be your biggest competitive advantage. But long before your company became a household name, you hit a wall where everything nearly collapsed. Take us back to that first major failure. What went wrong, and how did you find the willpower to restart?
Oh, the Panic of 1907 was a tremendous wall, Calvin. We were still a young, growing department store, heavily reliant on credit and steady consumer spending to manage our massive inventory and the overhead of our grand building. When the financial panic hit, banks across the country restricted cash payments, and confidence evaporated overnight. It felt like the ground was crumbling beneath us. I found the willpower to restart and push through by leaning heavily on my faith and my transparent relationships with our creditors. Instead of hiding, I confronted the crisis head-on, communicated with absolute honesty, and kept our doors open with a cheerful spirit, ensuring our customers knew we weren't going anywhere.
Innovation often looks like madness to contemporaries. Was there a specific product, philosophy, or strategy you were utterly convinced would work, but the public initially rejected or ridiculed. How did you respond?
Our strategy of sticking to a strict one-price policy and avoiding sensational, misleading sales gimmicks was looked at with skepticism. People love the thrill of the haggle or the promise of unbelievable discounts. When we insisted on fair, marked prices that reflected true value, some thought we were too rigid to survive. I responded by doubling down on our newspaper advertisements, using them as a tool to educate the public. I wrote plain, straightforward copy explaining why our prices were fair and why reliable quality mattered more than a cheap trick. Eventually, the public realized they could trust a Dayton price blindly, and the skepticism turned into immense loyalty.
Behind the legendary name was a human being facing immense pressure, whether from financial panics, internal betrayal, or personal doubt. How did you shoulder that burden without letting the vision splinter?
I shouldered it by never carrying it alone, Calvin. I spent time in prayer every single day, handing over the burdens that were beyond my control. I also shared the load with my family, especially my sons, whom I brought into the business to ensure we stood as a united front. I also focused heavily on my philanthropic work. When the business pressures felt overwhelming, focusing on the Dayton Foundation or my work with the church reminded me of the bigger picture. It kept my ego in check and reminded me that the store was just a tool to do good, which kept the vision perfectly aligned.
Keeping that bigger perspective is so vital. Let's talk about the people who helped you build it. Who were the very first people, beyond your immediate family, to buy into what you were doing? How did you convince early workers or customers to trust an entirely unproven concept?
The very first people were the existing clerks and managers from the old Goodfellow company who chose to stay with me when I took over. They were nervous, of course, because I was a banker, not a lifelong retail man. I convinced them by showing them respect, paying fair wages, and demonstrating a tireless work ethic right alongside them. For the customers, I gained their trust by making a promise. If an item wasn't satisfactory, we would make it right. When the public saw that a promise made by Dayton was a promise kept, word of mouth did the rest.
Can you take us to the exact moment where you felt the momentum shift? What was the specific milestone, contract, or breakthrough where you realized we aren't just going to survive, we are going to change everything?
It was during our massive expansion celebrations in the 1920s when we officially became the largest department store in the upper Midwest. We had expanded our square footage significantly, added modern amenities, and the crowds that poured through the doors were absolutely breathtaking. Watching thousands of people navigate the beautiful aisles, seeing the smiles on their faces, and looking at the sheer volume of goods moving through the store, I remember standing on one of the upper balconies with a profound sense of awe. I looked down and thought, we are no longer just a local shop. We are the very heartbeat of this region's commerce.
I can only imagine the view from that balcony. You didn't just build a company. You built a distinct culture and philosophy that outlasted you. In the early days, when it was just a handful of people in a room, how did you instill that standard of excellence or service?
I instilled it by being present, Calvin. I didn't sit tucked away in a distant office. I walked the floors. I spoke with the clerks. I greeted the customers. If I saw a piece of paper on the floor, I picked it up. If I saw a customer waiting, I ensured they were helped. I taught our early staff that no task was beneath anyone and that the reputation of the Dayton name rested on every single interaction. Culture isn't written on a piece of paper. It is caught by watching how the leader behaves when he thinks no one is looking.
Lead by example, always. Now, history books often flatten a person's life into a neat, polished narrative. What is the biggest misconception people have about your journey, your character, or how your company was actually built?
I think the biggest misconception is that it was an easy, calculated march to success because I started with capital from banking. People assume a banker just writes a check and a successful empire appears. They don't see the sleepless nights during financial panics, the constant anxiety of shifting consumer tastes, or the immense gamble of expanding during uncertain times. It wasn't a cold, calculated financial equation. It was a deeply personal, high-stakes journey fueled by faith, sweat, and an enormous amount of daily worry.
Building an empire always requires a steep personal cost. Looking back at the entirety of your life, what was the hardest sacrifice you had to make for the sake of your vision? And was it ultimately worth it?
The hardest sacrifice was undoubtedly my time and mental presence. When you are building a venture of that magnitude, it demands your thoughts even when you are at home. There were countless dinners and family moments where my mind was inevitably pacing the floors of the store, worrying about supply lines or expenditures. It is a heavy tax on your peace of mind. But looking back at the end of my days, seeing the thousands of jobs we created, the community institutions we funded through our success, and the honest legacy passed to my children, I can say with a grateful heart that it was worth it.
If you could send a single sentence back through time to yourself on the very first day you started this venture, knowing every trial, triumph, and heartbreak that awaited you, what would you say?
I would look myself in the eye and say, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, give your absolute best to the people, and do not let the temporary panics shake your enduring faith."
That is a beautiful piece of advice for any era. George, do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before signing off?
I just want to say how deeply grateful I am to have had this opportunity to reflect on the past. To everyone listening, remember that business is more than just profit. It is an avenue of service to your fellow man. Build your foundations on integrity, and the structure will stand the test of time. Thank you so much for having me, Calvin. It has been a true joy.
George, the joy was entirely ours. Thank you for sharing your incredible wisdom with us. Wow, what an amazing look into the life of George Draper Dayton, a man who built an empire on the foundation of the Golden Rule, proving that integrity and massive success can go hand in hand. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast, Founder Stories. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.